Hello and welcome back to Daily Debrief brought to you by People's Dispatch, your daily dose of news from around the globe. I'm Shriya and today we bring to you an update from the 152nd Executive Board meeting of WHO, while in UK several human rights organizations and activist groups have slammed the Tory government's anti-strike legislation. And finally, we talk about an interesting development for Russian and Belarusian players who have been invited to compete at this year's Asian Games. The 152nd session of the WHO's Executive Board is currently underway at the organization's headquarters in Geneva, Switzerland. The board meeting, which began on January 30th, is set to conclude on February 7th and will serve as a run-up to the World Health Assembly. We're joined by Jyotsna Singh from People's Health Movement, who is currently present at Geneva and brings you the latest on and off the scenes from the event. Hi Jyotsna, thank you for joining us straight from Geneva. I'm sure it must be pretty hectic for you there. And so first off, can you tell us what's happening there? What have been the proceedings so far and what does it look like?
Yeah. Thank you, Shriya. Hectic and cold. It's very cold here. At night, the temperatures goes in minus at times. But I think the problem is that it's not just chill in the air, but many health activists, they feel the chill. Otherwise, also because of the kind of exclusion they are facing at WHO. So, just to give you an example, for example, so the WHO building is being renovated, and that's why WHO said that there will be only limited number of delegates from each organization will be allowed in. A lot of people flew in here also because during COVID time, we were allowed to submit video statements and they will be read out on the floor. So our interventions would be read out or just shown in the videos. So that practice, WHO said, will not continue anymore. You have to come and read in person your statements. So a lot of people put on, and then when we reached, we realized that one is actually not allowed inside the room. You still have to sit in the overflow room and just look at the screen and know what the proceedings are. So a lot of people are feeling that this is not fair, and it is really spending a lot of resources and wasting resources without really giving people the opportunity to be in the room. And just if I can tell you what happens is when you are inside that room, you are looking at the government officials who have come. You sort of try to understand how you can do advocacy. A lot of people come because this is the only way they can meet the government officials from their own countries. They don't have those opportunities otherwise, because everything is so closed in many countries, right? And not accessible for the health activists. So this building traditionally has provided those opportunities. We can still meet, but then no, the seclusion one can see compared to other meetings a lot more. I have been attending World Health Assembly and EB for like 5 years now, and it is really far more difficult to know what is happening than before. So that is happening, and but also if I can tell you that obviously the activists are not going to keep quiet. So there is, I mean, we are holding something called EB Today every morning. It is a civil society meeting online. So our colleagues who are from in other countries can also join, and we discuss and we share information and we talk as to what is happening. So, and in that constantly we talk about how we are being excluded, and we hope that this collective thing that is happening now we will be able to come together and really raise our demands and tell WHO that this is absolutely unacceptable. That like we are not domestic pets, we are far more important than that, and we are people. So let's see. Yes. And there are a couple of statements which are already there online and have been signed by a lot of civil society organizations demanding more engagement and involvement of activists.
Right, and besides the experts, like you mentioned, the activists are also raising very important points. What does the atmosphere look like right now there?
Yeah, so as I told you, the building is being renovated, many things have changed, but it's really interesting how international politics constantly makes its appearance in these discussions. So for example, yesterday the Director General Tedros, he put his report, which is like annually they have to do it, this reporting, what all activities happen in the last 1 year, right? And all the countries then just respond to it. So it's a statement that the country thinks. So, like one country would come and say, "Oh, mental health issue very important," and Ukraine-Russia war has really created so much of problem regarding mental health. So you can see, I mean, these are like some colorful things you can recognize. Like for example, the uh, delegate from Afghanistan, he actually spoke against his own government because he actually was part of the previous government and not the Taliban government. And continues to be an official, but I mean, it must have taken a lot of courage on his part, of course. But then he did that. So you do see these things, and you also see the way developing countries come together and make certain demands. Because as COVID-19 has shown the kind of inequity, it has actually increased across. So when developed countries, one after the other in their statements, they try to talk about, you know, spending on certain one program or something of that sort. Developing countries, you can see, talk about health system strengthening, that you cannot tackle one disease by disease. One can't do. You If your health systems work, then all diseases are taken care of, which you usually find that developed countries are not very keen on. But then the developing countries. So that is one. Another thing which many of us did not know, but so Brazil said yesterday that in May in World Health Assembly, and as you know, this is EB Executive Board meeting is run-up meeting to WHA. They're going to bring a resolution, a very important one, on the right to health of indigenous populations. So I think this is something that everybody will start to work towards, and it's important because it is the tribals who fall in that category, and then the agribusiness and mining companies, the kind of land grab that happens of the indigenous populations, and all of that ultimately impacts their health status so much. So we hope that that resolution will do something to protect their rights. And I think Brazil, because the kind of government they have, which is a progressive government, they also are saying, uh, uh, like the indigenous populations should be given the right to govern their own health, because the very idea of how you treat is different. It may be less medicalized, but in other forms, people do certain things. So be more democratic is something we hope that Brazil will ask for them in May. So I think we all would like to support that. Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining us, Jyotsna. We'll closely keep following this event with you and with PHM. Thank you. More than 50 human rights and civil liberties groups slammed the Tory government's new anti-strike legislation as an attack on the fundamental right to take industrial action. On Monday, January 30, the strike's minimum service levels bill was passed in the House of Commons. Unions warn that the legislation would empower the bosses to sack striking workers if they refuse to work their own legally held walkouts by providing a certain level of services across key sectors including health, transport and education. Abdul from People's Dispatch joins us for more updates on this issue. Welcome back to the show, Abdul. Can you first off tell us what are some of the provisions of the bill that are being criticized and what can be the implications once it comes into effect and if it comes into effect?
Well, the bill talks about certain minimum public services required, which everyone has to do, even during the strike. And if they are not they are not doing it, they choose not to deliver those public services, they will not be protected from being fired. And primarily, this is the basic provision. It basically extends the earlier law, which was passed last year, which basically had the similar provisions in the transportation services, public transport services. Now it is seeking to extend it into education, health, and other fire services and other such public services. So the what will be the impact of it? Of course, the unions are calling it as an attempt to basically to take away the right to strike. They are calling it giving the management a blank check to do whatever they want to do with their workers, and it is basically giving arbitrary power to the management and to the ministries, the public service ministries, which basically will decide the fate of the workers. Despite what the government is claiming, that it does not mean that this will lead to sacking of sacking of workers and so on and so forth. These trade unions are quite sure about it, that this will lead to the massive uh, action against striking workers. Uh, uh, it would mean, since there is a fundamental difference between what government is seeking to do and what the trade unions are thinking of it, it seems it will lead to the further mass actions against this bill in the near future.
And on the same note, Abdul, what is the context of introducing this bill? We know that in UK and in other countries, widespread protests have been seen in the past few months by workers. What can be the intention of introducing this bill right now?
Well, as you rightly pointed out, the basic reason behind introducing the bill at this time is what UK has witnessed in last 1.5 years or more than that. There has been various actions, various strikes undertaken by the workers in different sectors in UK, including the health and transportation. And it seems that those such strikes are going to increase further, given the fact that the UK, like other European countries, is facing what is called a cost of living crisis, which basically means the inflation is high, their wages are not increasing as per the inflation, for various reasons. Of course, there is a larger reason of that the policies most of the European governments have been following for a very long time, which basically froze the wages, and the inflation is rising because of the war and because of the post-COVID recovery and whatnot.
Right.
So, if you include all of them together, there is a crisis situation. As per the predictions, UK is one of the few economies in the world which is going to be facing further crisis. Other than some of the European countries might recover. That's what the projection of the major think tanks in the world are. But UK may take longer to recover. In fact, it will go into the recession. So, given the fact that UK isn't going to be facing a massive economic crisis, and the inflation is not going to ease, and the conservative government has no plans to ease the inflation. It has basically followed to just give one example. It has followed the US dictates on Russia, despite the fact that the energy coming from that country would have eased inflation to a certain level. So it seems that the conservative government has no plans to work on easing inflation, so they basically want to prevent the worker from carrying out their legitimate right to demand higher wages, to basically face their crisis.
Thank you so much for joining us, Abdul, today. The Olympic Council of Asia, the body that oversees multidisciplinary and Olympic sports on the continent, has put forward the idea of inviting athletes from Russia and Belarus to participate in the next edition of the continent's biggest sporting event, the Asian Games. Taking place in Hangzhou, in China later this year, athletes from the two countries have been exiled from several international sports since the war in Ukraine began almost a year ago. It is one of the most interesting developments in sport on the Asian continent in the recent past. And to talk a little more about it, we have Sidhant Ani with us, joining us in the studio with latest updates. Welcome to the episode, Sidhant. Glad to have you here in the studio. So, from a sporting perspective, what are the intentions and possibly the advantages of this move that the OCA is inviting Belarusian and Russian players? We'll start with that. Yeah, so first off that.
And we can look at the modalities of how they are trying to do this. But essentially, the idea that the current head of the Olympic Council of Asia, who's an Indian and a long-time member of the International Olympic Committee, Randhir Singh, former Olympian himself, is to, like we hear very often, separate the domain of sport from the domain of politics. We also know that in practical terms, this is an impossibility. We've seen it at every major sporting event in the recent past. The Australian Open that just concluded is no exception to it, with a player from Belarus winning the women's singles title. The FIFA World Cup at Qatar, similar political statements were made across the board from various sides. So the idea that has been proposed by the Olympic Council of Asia is that these athletes are being unfairly sort of targeted for decisions that they really have no part to play in, that their governments have taken, and they are facing the fallout. And one of the tenets of the Olympic Charter is that when things like this happen, then the athletes don't face the impact of it. For example, when there was this massive doping situation that evolved with regard to the Russian Olympic Committee, even in that case, it was determined, like at the recently concluded 2022 Winter Games in Beijing, that Russian athletes would compete, but they would compete under the flag of the Russian Olympic Committee and not Russia itself, not the Russian Federation. So these kind of symbolic distinctions are made, and it's yet to become clear. And over the course of the week, we'll be speaking to Randhir and figuring out what kind of conversations they are having with various bodies, including the International Olympic Committee, which actually a few days ago said at its executive board meeting that they are figuring out a way, a mechanism for these athletes to also compete in Paris 2024, to which of course Ukraine has taken serious objection. So from a sporting standpoint, it's great for the Asian Games, I would say, because it immediately takes the level of competition in a variety of disciplines to another level. So it gives Asian competitors, Asian athletes, a chance to compete against some athletes who are actually the best in the world at what they do. That has a positive impact then on television audiences, on those who are coming to to stadiums to watch. Of course, for example, Sabalenka, who won the Australian Open, if she decides to be one of the participants, then the women's tennis singles tournament will definitely gain a great deal of prestige, probably fan following, coverage, etc., etc., which is all in the benefit of, I think, sport in general in the Asian continent. Of course, there will be some objections raised because the Asian Games for several sports like boxing, wrestling, several others are qualifiers for Paris 2024. So Asian athletes who have a chance of qualifying, for example, India wins a number of medals at the Asian Games, which they don't at the Olympic Games. So our athletes and coaches and governing bodies will be concerned that if we have Russian athletes competing, our chances are significantly reduced. So it has been clarified that there will be separate quotas for Russian and Belarusian athletes who come in, and particularly in individual disciplines where quota places for the Olympics are concerned, those will not go to the Russians. Even in cases of medals, they have said that if a Russian wins the competition, for example, the next best Asian competitor will actually get the medal, and that will go to their credit. So essentially, they are coming in for their athletes to get practice, to give our athletes a chance to compete against a higher level, and overall create an environment that's mutually beneficial.
Right, and like you rightly said, Sidhant, sports and politics may look like they're poles apart, but they're never really.
Yeah.
And the thing is, there surely is some intention or a motive, not so ulterior, to this move. Would you want to highlight that?
Yes, of course, politics plays a massive part in all of this. Just as with any world governing body of any sport, there are elections that take place at the end of every cycle, and then new leadership comes into the fold. Now, Europe, because of its resources, its influence, money, all of that, has generally dominated, like it dominates, every other sphere, Europe and by extension the global north, the west, also dominates how elections happen in top sporting bodies for most sports, and the Olympic Committee is no exception to it. So here, I think to some extent, the Asian Olympic the Olympic Council of Asia, as it's known, is providing a counter based on what a large number of Asian countries also feel about the conflict in Russia and Ukraine. That not to pick sides, and to stick to the tenets that, at least as far as they are concerned, determine how things are run in their sphere, right? So if the Europeans, for example, UEFA has decided to ban Russia from and Russian clubs from all football competitions, FIFA did the same, and Wimbledon has done the same in terms of tennis. So Asia is providing a counter to that argument in some sense. There was even a conversation, for example, in football, where at one point the Russians were looking at shifting from UEFA, which is the European Confederation, to Asia, so that they would be able to play essentially. That's not happening, but on this conversation front, in terms of participating in a multidisciplinary sporting event, the Asian Games is one of the biggest you can get. I mean, there are so many countries, so much of the world's population being represented. So even for them, even from a diplomatic standpoint, it's a great opportunity to send their athletes to participate in this event, even if it is just as sort of exhibition or showpiece kind of participation.
Right. Thank you so much for joining us, Sidhant.
Anytime, sir.
And that's all we have for today. For more such stories and updates from around the globe, keep following peoplesdispatch.org. You can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram.